Let me go and do the
A very good afternoon to all of you, our dear professors, dear students, and faculty members, and thank you all for being here to celebrate with us European languages. And it's usually on 26th of September, but we are very grateful to our speakers and professors who take our time to discuss with us valuable thoughts. And everybody knows that European languages is like very important in terms of promoting and learning for languages and the linguistic diversity. We have today with us guest speaker. Professor Nalini from Pondicherry University, and she's a professor of French language, civilization, and French literature at Pondicherry University. And we have honorary speakers from JSU, Professor Untitled, Dean and Professor from General School of Language and Literature, Professor Nayak, Director of Global Language Center, Professor Namu, he's Professor of Sociology of General School of Liberal Arts. And also we have the opportunity to have with us Professor Tam, who's the Professor and Dean of General School of Liberal Arts. So she'll be joining us shortly. Thank you so much all, and hope you all enjoy the session. Thank you. I request Professor Gopa to kindly give a welcome address. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here to celebrate the European Languages Day. Why is European languages so important to us? When I was trying to read about it, I saw a lot of similarity of European languages with our Indian languages. Like European languages have about 600 of them, and perhaps if we take our dialects and languages, we also have a wide variety. And as the European languages also have a need to revive the languages that are going obsolete now because of the dominance of one or a few languages. Similarly, in India, perhaps there is focus and a need to revive our languages. So it's not about celebration only of European languages, but along with the languages, I think perhaps we have to remember that languages are connected with our sentiments, with our emotions, with our culture. And what does culture mean? It means our food, our dress, our everything, and perhaps is reflected in our languages. So if we forget our languages, I think we are forgetting part of our identity. So that's the message I want to bring home to. Perhaps we all are too much into English language, if I may say so. I'm earning my bread from that. But at the same time, I think we all owe our, what should I say? We are not only connected to our other languages, but I think a lot of our identity also depends on the language that we have encountered or we are exposed to. And that makes our personality that much well-rounded and accomplished, I guess. So languages have a role to play, and let's celebrate European languages, and on the guise of European languages, maybe all languages and what it means to us as human beings in terms of our identity and culture and everything else that we present. Thank you, Navneet, for taking this opportunity to celebrate and bringing on this. Your enthusiasm is always appreciated. And thank you all the professors, Professor Clammer, Professor Layton, for coming together to celebrate this day with us. Thank you so much. Now I pass on to Professor Layton to Professor Nalini is also here. I'm sorry, I forgot Professor Nalini. Apologies for that. Online people are generally, becoming invisible when we have so many physical people around us. My apologies. And welcome to General University. And I would really thank you for taking time out to speak to us. Looking forward to your address. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this introduction. I hope I'm audible. Yeah. Okay. So, honorable members of this august audience, esteemed professors and dear students, a very good evening to one and all present here. It is indeed a privilege to speak at this significant webinar centered on the European Day of Languages, which was celebrated yesterday all over the world for the 21st time. I do thank Dr. Navriti Sharma, Assistant Professor in French Global Languages Center, and the O.P. Jindal Global University for having graciously invited me on this momentous occasion to share a few of my thoughts on this theme, which I have titled Unity in Diversity, the Linguistic and Cultural Mosaic in Europe. In fact, Noam Chomsky, the American linguist, rightly affirmed that, I quote, a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of a community, a whole history that creates what a community is. It's all embodied in a language. We all know that the first time the European Day of Languages was celebrated was on 26 September 2001. And ever since this successful event, September 26th is a day that marks this annual commemoration. In fact, the initial year of 2001 was the European Year of Languages. Hence, the European Union and the Council of Europe, comprising 47 members, thought it fit to thus honor the linguistic diversity and encourage the learning of various languages throughout their member states. Thus, many discussions and linguistic policy measures evolved on this eminent day. In fact, as per the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Maria Pejcinovic-Buric, Buric actually, I hope I pronounced it correctly, a Croatian politician who was elected as the 14th Secretary General of the Council of Europe, who said, I quote, the European Day of Languages is a celebration of the rich tapestry of languages which make our continent so special. Linguistic diversity is our cultural heritage. It helps us appreciate difference and helps us understand that diversity is our strength. Let us value all languages in Europe, unquote. The more a language is spoken, the less chances there are it will die out or get endangered. In fact, the European inhabitants thrive in a multilingual and multicultural environment, and such an annual celebration centering on language has the merit of promoting the various hues emanating from the different states. This enhances an avid curiosity and interest, knowledge and understanding about other ways of speaking and behaving, and more tolerance too. It also instills a respect and admiration for the cultural ethos of divergent people and reveals the European heritage emanating from every nook and corner. Even the minorities are considered when emerge the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages in 25 member states, as also the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. We also know how the European Union rallied around Ukraine during the recent war outbreak to prove its solidarity with the nations in peril. The Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, CEFR, emerges out of a European study and regulates the learning of the core oral and written skills in a European language, culminating in the relevant diplomas from A1 to C2, 6 levels which certify the linguistic knowledge acquired. According to Roger Bacon, I quote, "Knowledge of languages is the doorway to wisdom," unquote. So the European Day of Languages has various events organized by the numerous countries in EU, such as fairs, book, touring exhibitions, for example, on Harry Potter, on Pinocchio, on Don Quixote, or on comic books or graphic novels, quizzes on the linguistic and cultural richness of Europe, translation and dictation competitions, music festivals, cultural programs, workshop on theater, language teaching innovations, and fun ways of learning and translating challenges. Hence, this year, there are 1,188 remarkable events by 42 countries and with 3,94,974 participants. So you can just imagine the wide range and diffusion. In fact, there are 24 official European languages, 1 European Union, and its eloquent motto of united in diversity, despite so many nations, languages, and cultures. There are 5 prime languages like English, despite Brexit, French, German, Spanish, and Italian, encompassing more than 50 million native speakers in Europe. In fact, this year from January 1st to June 30th, France presided over the Council of the European Union. So obviously it has become more important to learn the French language, and stress is given more on resolving the ecological, social, and digital issues and the democratic values established by EU. Moreover, this year has been designated as the European Year of Youth and focuses on the importance of young people in the elaboration of a better future, which would further biodiversity and ecology, digital progress, health, and welfare. The EU linguistic promotion states that languages inspire, educate, enchant, and connect. They also open doors and bridge gaps. As Nelson Mandela rightly observed, I quote, "When you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. But when you speak to him in his own language, it goes straight to his heart," unquote. Of course, at the dawn of speech, there were inhibitions to learn other languages, and there were purists who did not want any language to be mixed with another one. But slowly, over the centuries, perceptions started varying, and there were attitudinal changes. Today, we have finally arrived to this era of globalization, where the need to learn foreign languages has become so necessary. Thus, learning other languages will enable an insight into other cultures of the world, heighten the students' convivial spirit, and also enrich the learner's global knowledge. Each student will opt for a particular language as per his or her interest, aspiration, and the linguistic prospects. This foreign language learning will enhance his mobility and travel across the world, bettering his fluency and exposure. Thus, multilingualism and a freedom of choice in learning languages will definitely foster communal and cultural harmony. But while learning a language, there's always the fear of embarrassment and an inhibition as each learner might be scared of making mistakes and being laughed at. But unless one makes mistakes, one will not know how to correct oneself, isn't it? We must always remember that mistakes are the beginning of experience, and experience is the beginning of wisdom. So, learning a foreign language is a sure and certain way to build up your self-confidence and search alternative words to express your thoughts. I re-quote Noam Chomsky, who said that language etches the grooves through which your thoughts must flow, unquote. Now, what exactly are the advantages of learning a foreign language? It is indeed beneficial as a foreign language helps you stand out, and you are thus in a fitter mold to fight for survival in this big, bad, modern world and successfully face the growing competition. Everyone now knows that it gives more potential in the job avenues, and in today's global economy, the chances are definitely enhanced for recruitment if you know a foreign language, which certainly enhances your CV. A foreign language well learned always gives an opportunity to convene or share a joke in it while on a visit abroad, or blend in undetected without the need of any interpreter. In fact, according to Rita Mae Brown, language is the roadmap of a culture. There is always cross-cultural sensitivity in foreign language teaching, learning. The intercultural aspects also add a stimulus in the simulated scenarios enacted in an FLT class. Intersection definitely promotes interaction, definitely promotes an active participation, and new linkages are thus built. Thus, once you acquire that language, one becomes aware of different cultures and savoir-vivre when foreign languages are learned. There are, for example, two or more cultures thus come into contact with each other, but they might be cultural or linguistic barriers one has to overcome. I was just wondering if I could play a video, a short video. Would it be possible, or shall I just continue?
Just check.
I can?
Yeah, I think yes. Just
Okay.
give me. Yeah, just. Yes, Professor, I think you can.
I can. Okay. I'll just see if it works out, because you never know with machines. 1 second.
Ma'am, you can do.
Okay.
You share your screen, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
Oysters à la parisienne.
Oui, ce sont des huîtres dans de la soupe au lait.
Ah, ça c'est étonnant. Oh là là. Attendez. C'est délicieux, delicious. Mange mon fils, c'est délicieux, mange. Que c'est bon. Voilà. Allez, mange, allons. C'est la tarte, ça.
Ah non, ça c'est le poisson, c'est du haddock.
Ah. Et ça?
Ah bah ça, ce sont des petites mandarines.
Et puis ça, là?
Ah bah ça, ce sont des cerises.
Oh. Et puis ça?
Ah bah la sauce, c'est une mayonnaise à la menthe.
Oh, c'est bon la menthe. Attendez. Délicieux. Allez, mange, c'est trop. Mange, allez, bang. Alors ça c'est le dessert.
Ah non.
Hein?
Non, ça c'est la viande. Avec la chantilly.
Ah, ça c'est étonnant. Ah, c'est étonnant. Allez. Delicious. Delicious. Tiens, mange, mange. Allez, mange mon fils. Allez, hop. Il faut finir le plat maintenant. Tout le plat. Delicious.
I hope the audio was, I mean, you could hear the audio.
Yes, yes, Professor, yes.
Okay, okay, fine. So as you see, I mean, this is a scene which is taken from one of the famous movies from the 60s with the famous comedian Louis de Funès, a French comedian. And in fact, the whole movie is about, exchange of, a French student who goes to England and an English student who comes to France in order to learn better the language. And you can see the hilarious, cultural quiproquos that you have in the whole movie. And this is one such scene where the gentleman, the elderly gentleman, does not know what each dish means. So in fact, at times, you also have these false friends and false cognates, as they're called, which impede the understanding. For example, one of the commonest mistakes that I made, library in English is not librairie in French, but bibliothèque. And affaire in English means an amorous link, whereas une affaire in French means business or matter. Similarly, bless in English means to shower goodwill and blessings, whereas blesser in French means to wound or injure or hurt. So you can imagine the misunderstandings which can happen when you don't know the right word to be used. In these days of globalization and bilateral or multilateral talks, linguistic and cultural skills in foreign languages definitely help to better the art of negotiation and thus avoid storm and strife, not to say war. Translators and interpreters are much sought after now, so that every nuance of a foreign language can be perfectly understood, especially during bilateral talks between two countries or in the European Commission or the Parliament. But just by knowing the grammar or the vocabulary in a foreign language does not prove the proficiency of a language learner, who should also master the skill of using the apt phrase or idiom in a relevant context. Hence, the strategy of globalization practices business by considering the local and global circumstances and uses the pertinent word which will be correctly perceived in the local and global regions, which you can see in the world of advertising especially. One can thus communicate better with the various clients, fulfill their expectations, and also understand the cultural codes and do's and don'ts. This is a very important factor in the corporates where any wrong interpretation can sabotage a whole business deal. As Nelson Mandela pointed out, I quote, "Without language, one cannot talk to people and understand them, grasp their history, appreciate their poetry, or savor their songs," unquote. In fact, not only does acquiring a second language improve one's memory and attention span, but the process of becoming bilingual exercises the brain too. So one becomes more logical and rational. One learns to toggle from one language to another and thus improve divergent thinking and one's multitasking abilities. According to Federico Fellini, he said, "A different language is a different vision of life." And if there is to be a better mutual understanding between two countries, the first move is to scale the linguistic hurdle, as knowledge of each country's language will only avoid any incomprehension or misunderstanding on either side during the bilateral dialogues. After all, Learning a foreign language not only adds value to a person's formation, but also helps an individual to understand another culture and build a communicating channel. I would just like to show you one more video which shows how the other person's culture and language has been adopted in order to have a proper channel of communication.
On behalf of the French Embassy, I want to send out my warmest wishes to the people in India and across the globe celebrating the Festival of Light. Despite the pandemic and the difficulties due to the current situation, the French people join you in celebrating this very important festival. Shubh Deepavali.
नमस्कार, मी सोनिया बाबरे, फ्रान्सची महाबाली जदूत मुंबई विभाग. माझ्यातर्फे तुम्हा सर्वांना दीपावलीच्या हार्दिक शुभेच्छा.
Shubhodaya from the Consulate General of France in Bengaluru. Deepavali Habada Shubhashayagalu. Andakiri Deepavali Shubhakangshalu. Ella Pudu. Miji Vitamlo. Velubu Ndaleani. Kurkuntunam.
Kalipujo এবং শুভ দীপাবলি উপলক্ষে সকলকে জানাই আমার প্রীতি ও শুভেচ্ছা. ভালো থাকবেন, সাবধানে থাকবেন.
Sanakan from the French Consulate General of Pondicherry and Chennai. Yen Ilia Deepavali. Nan Vashtekel. Ongal Anei Varakun. Nan.
To all of you, I wish a very happy and prosperous Deepavali.
Yeah, so now in fact, Deepavali is not very far, so it is right in proportion to have shown you this video, which came out last year, in fact. I think there's a problem with my, yeah, okay. So now, in fact, the NEP in our present Indian educational scenario does encourage an internationalization of higher education and seeks to establish as an important participant among the knowledge hubs of the world. It allows more opportunities of research collaboration as well as international student exchange programs between India and foreign universities with an exchange of academic credits. In turn, this will also increase in international business opportunities, not only within the education sector, but in every other domain. So both the Indian and the foreign students will benefit from this to and fro mobility. Hence, with this learning of foreign languages, new rapports will be established between the people of different countries in a dialogue of cultures at the crossroads of lands and histories, creating thus a new transnational space where the hegemonic looming shadow or any kind of chauvinism are slowly erased. And I will end my talk with a quote from Edmund de Waal, who says that with languages, you are at home anywhere. Thank you so much.
So much, Professor Malini, for taking up time and sharing your valuable thoughts. Thank you so much. I request Professor Dennis to share your thoughts and experience what are your languages. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Nalabiti and Sugopa also for inviting me to participate in this. Professor Hamdi has given us a lot to think about in terms of intercultural communication and that sort of thing. I just have a couple of few observations to make about what is meant by European, what is meant by global, and what we actually mean describes non-certain languages as being both global and European, and raise a few issues about what that brings us to. So at the risk of sounding kind of ordinary, now I want to point out that obviously, as you know already, if you're studying French, that several of today's European languages are European or are global, or rather they're European in terms of their origins, right? Their geographical origins. Language began in France, so we learned, even though the France in which that language emerged about 1,500 years ago or more doesn't exactly correspond to present-day France, but anyway, y'all get the idea of where France is, and French began in France. We all know that these European languages are so in terms of their origins and not necessarily in terms of their present usage and extent. So French is still virtually every other continent of the world, and it's a major language, either L1 or L2 in several other countries. Quebec, Eastern Canada, plenty of countries in West Africa, and so on. Okay, so these are regions of the world where French is used. So we all understand that when we talk about French is a global language. Talk about it in a moment. Spanish is a global language. The number of speakers of those languages outside of the point of origin often exceeds or even far exceeds the number of people who still speak those languages in their point of origin. So what do we mean? Why do we use terms like use the term global language to describe Mandarin Chinese or English, French, or Spanish? In fact, there's no kind of ironclad definition of what a global language is, but when anthropologists, linguists, political scientists, sociologists use this to refer to a language as a global language, they usually mean that, okay, it started in one place, but there are a lot of other speakers, and perhaps the number of speakers of that language outside the point of origin is considerable. And there's some interesting, contrast there if we look at, say, English, where approximately 1.5 billion people in the world use English today. If not as their first language, then it's their second or third language. Yet the number of people who use it as their first language is just a fraction. It's 370 million people in North America, the UK, so Australia, New Zealand, a few other places. Okay, so and again, think about that spread or development. English is a global language, from a language which, in the time of Shakespeare, when Shakespeare died in 1616, there are about 5 million English speakers in the whole world, and almost all of them are in England. Okay, a couple colonies in North America, and a lot of cutthroat pirates and buccaneers sailing around the North Atlantic, speaking English also. But English was a language that was not used by anyone, virtually anyone other than in England. And in fact, it was still competing against languages like Welsh or Scots, which many consider to be a separate language or a strong dialect. Point is that, I'm not sure what it's here actually, except that Mandarin Chinese presents an interesting case of the majority of the speakers of Chinese today being Chinese proper. There's still being several tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions of people in Southeast Asia, and widely dispersed diasporic populations, virtually every other country in the world where there are people who speak Chinese. English, on the other hand, you might say the original homeland of English, the tiny little England, with 5 million English speakers in Shakespeare, to now a language spoken, used by 1.5 billion people, and only a minority of those being in the original homelands of English. And in fact, the number of L2 speakers using English as a second language far exceeding the number of people who use it as a first language. To the extent that if you go to Finland today, a small country with just a few million people, I haven't been to Finland recently, but I can assure you that virtually everyone in Finland under the age of 40 speaks English, and in fact speaks it very well. So English has been globalized to that extent. Globalization of European languages, of course, as you already know, is a process of imperialism. We use the simple word imperialism, we talk about cultural imperialism. That's obviously the reason for the spread of English in the subcontinent, for example. And probably the prime example of the language that exported itself most successfully through colonialism is Spanish. Okay. Today, again, if you look at L1 native speakers of Spanish, it's something like 475 million, and no more than 10% of those speakers are in Spain. So just think about the number of Spanish speakers in Spain is a minority, very small minority, the total number of Spanish speakers in the world. There are other interesting scenarios, such as that states where probably 12 to 15% of the population in the United States speaks or understands Spanish and speaks it as L1 and L2. So again, I apologize, it's kind of a banal point, but we call these European languages, and we mean that these are languages that originated in Europe, but didn't stay there, right? And they become global languages in that very obvious sense. I want to leave enough time for my fellow speaker, John Clammer. But I wanted to finish up by saying a few things about what makes a language European apart from its point of origin. Let's consider that in the 16th century, probably Italian ranked as the most prestigious, the most culturally respected language in Europe. It was the language of operas, of librettos, church music, sacred music, secular music, stage, literature. A lot of formally educated people in many parts of Europe really bowed down to Italian as being the most culturally dominant language. By the late 17th century, Italian was being supplanted by French as what I call the most prestigious language. It's being used for international diplomacy, treaties, French drama and literature and poetry and philosophy was getting more attention, and essentially French supplanted Italian as the language that educated Europeans, whether they were Russia or the Netherlands or Scotland or Italy, you need to know. And by the 18th century, you see the kind of Frenchification or Francophonification of Germany or Russia. Russians didn't speak French in the century, but virtually every Russian considered herself so well educated by the late 1700s, at least understood French. Same with the Germans, and as Russian King Frederick II put it, supposedly it was powerful, but sometime in the 70s or 80s, he said, French is the language for civilized people. You use German to speak to your servants, or your horses, or your dogs, peasantry. It's not a language of polite conversations. So it's obvious ways in which French became dominant, and arguing that English has become dominant in this way. I'm not sure I'm making my clear here, but we can talk about globalization. Globalization is a process, and we can also talk about Europeanization of languages as the process by which particular languages become widely used in other parts of Europe. And as Professor Monti mentioned, there are 23 or 24 official languages within the European Union, But there are, of course, many, many European languages and European dialects, and the diversity of languages and dialects in Europe, of course, is very rich. I just want to finish up here in maybe a rather obscure reference or a reference to a European language that is spoken by almost no one in the world today, and that is a language called Erse, Irish Gaelic. Okay? So the Gaelic peoples in northwestern Europe, including Irish, the Bretons, and others. The Irish had a language that was not English, that in fact is still spoken and is taught in schools, and the Irish Parliament, the Irish government need to publish some of their proceedings and so on in the Irish language, and yet virtually no one actually speaks Irish or Erse uses it as a normal conversation. In fact, I discovered that until a couple of years ago, to get into the Angada Shahana, which is the Irish police, had to pass an exam in the Irish language. In 2005, they scrapped it. So no English. That's okay. In fact, they're even encouraging learning languages like Chinese for official use by, say, policemen in Ireland. Okay, but the Irish language simply doesn't exist as a normal means of communication. The reason I'm mentioning this kind of obscure example, and I'm not going to trace the decline of the Irish language historically, except to point out that there were a lot of Irish cultural leaders in the century, particularly from the 1840s onward, as part of Young Ireland, which was trying to assert Irish cultural independence in relation to Britain and the United Kingdom. It was a movement that continued into the late 19th centuries, and there are people who said, look, the Irish language is already lost. By the 1860s, there are no more than 100,000 speakers of Erse, far western edges of Ireland. It's been gradually, rather dramatically, eroded over a period of 3 or 4 centuries, so that almost no one speaks it. How do we remain Irish if we use the language of the conqueror, right? The language that subdued us. Can English actually serve as the language of the Irish? And can English, as used by Irish people, be recognized as a European language? For poets like William Butler Yeats in the 1800s, who believed that was possible. So there are ways, to finish up here, there are ways in which languages, of course, can be imposed, ways in which languages can be more or less freely adopted for generations or several generations. And there are ways in which people, or mainly for reasons of their own choices, because they business or because they communicate with people more effectively for another reason, who adopt the language like English or Spanish, whatever, and easily understand the reasons for doing that. One final point to make here, in the definition of global languages, a couple of years ago when I was staying in a hotel in London, and I went down to the breakfast room, and almost all of the speakers were speaking Bangla. It's like, hey, the key teaching. What's going on here? Right? Okay, well, there are obviously probably several tens of thousands of Bangla speakers in London and other cities in England. Yet, and if you look at Bengali as in terms of the number of speakers, it's actually right up there. It's on the 5th or the 6th most widely used language. But you could probably agree that it's not really a global language simply because most of the people who speak Bangla are in Bangladesh or India, with in a dispersed diaspora population, including those poor waiters at the presidency hotel in London. So I'm mentioning this simply to get you maybe to think about why it is that we treat some languages as global and others as regional, and also to think about the use, the choosing of a particular language other than your mother tongue, and the reasons you do that. So I understand most of you here are learning French, hope you're enjoying that, the great strides in that. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak.
You clear enough with my vote? If you can't, just signal to me. Well, let me say a couple of things initially. First of all, it's lovely to hear a colleague from Pondicherry. I taught for a semester at Pondicherry Central University about 8 years ago. And it's the only place, as far as I know, in India where the street names are in Tamil and French. Okay? So if you go there, you can see, I mean, in the old town, the French still have a district. Secondly, I'm actually deeply offended by something that said. I'm from a German-speaking family. And we did speak to each other, not only, I don't think we had any servants, but we did. we definitely talked to the dog in German, but I think we also talked to each other in German as well. My family origins, actually, no, we're not, we are actually from Austria. Not to be confused with Germany, okay? If you do, it's a bit like Canadians become terribly offended if you think they're from the US, you know, or New Zealanders. You know, if you say that it's Australia, they don't like it, but don't worry about that. Okay. Well, I know the theme was announced to you today, and Professor Dennis just talked about European languages. And a number of thoughts occurred to me as I was asked to come to this forum. I mean, one is that looked at from a kind of historical and sociological point of view, one of the most interesting things is the way, indeed, which a small number of European languages have tended to colonize much of the rest of the world. And that's, okay, that's just remind me of the things I will probably forget to say. You know, here we are in darkness Haryana speaking English, right? Well, we probably should be speaking Hindi, or how about Sanskrit? Which I'm actually meaning to learn. I was thinking to India, and I haven't quite get around to it for some reason, but maybe one of these days. You know, if we have more leisure, let's teach it. I could have more time to learn Sanskrit. But it's time on. I did it here, right? So I can start this. But we often forget that the flow of linguistic influence, of course, is multi-directional. And it's multi-directional in several senses, as Professor Dennis just said. Of course, if we think of the 5 big European languages, big in terms of number of speakers, there are lots and lots of languages which is very hard to learn without going to the country. I don't know of more than maybe any universities that teach Czech, or Finnish, or Hungarian, or what else? Irish, maybe, or Icelandic, or even Norwegian or Danish, or something like this. The speakers of most of those languages, of course, you find out are often very, very fluent in English, precisely because they can't communicate with anybody else. If they don't, you go to Holland, for example, or you go to Sweden, definitely in West Germany, you'll almost certainly find that people do indeed speak English. I've lived in what is now the eastern part of Germany, rather than say East Germany anymore, it's the eastern bit, okay, where in fact the second language was, of course, you probably guess, what do you think it was? Certainly wasn't English. Russian. No? So I wanted a newspaper, a non-German newspaper. I could cycle out to the railway station sometimes, hoping they had maybe an English paper. And often I was disappointed, but they'd have 3 or 4 Russian language newspapers. The older generation, this was very much, of course, their second language. English was the language essentially of the enemy, right? And not learned by people except for people who are specialists. So the flow has been multi-directional, and if you I believe there still is a dictionary you can buy of influence of Indian languages on English. You know, Dobson, right? Bungalow, pajama, tiffin, you know, any number of words which in fact have spread, you know, to the then erstwhile colonialists from their having to hang around with people who also not only spoke local languages, but themselves had to learn those languages to have any kind of advancement in the colonial civil service. And many people, in fact, of course, became very, very fluent in any of the regional languages in India. What may surprise you is that you do the same in an interesting way. When you go for your lunch, if you don't go to the food court, where do you go? I know we have several choices. You go to Honey Cafe or something, but you probably go to the mess. Okay? which is an interesting word to find still in usage. In colloquial English, the only usage of the word mess that I'm aware of is in the army. That's where you go for lunch if you're in the armed forces. Well, if you go to an English university for your master's or something, you'll go to the canteen. If you go to one of the very posh universities, you might go to the hall, right? But you don't go to the mess. People will be very surprised if you use that kind of word. So it's really interesting to look at least two or three things here. One is simply the spread of linguistic influence from one language to another. But also, of course, to trace it a little bit to the kind of social and historical conditions which have promoted that kind of mixing. And indeed, when we're talking about Europe, the fact that many people, in, say, Sweden, speak English as their second language, because otherwise they probably can't communicate with the rest of the world. And you sometimes find very, very strange combinations of this. But if you decide to go to Germany for your higher education course, but if you do, advantage number one, by the way, is it's free. So Papa would be happy if you have no fees, right? Okay. And number two, many German universities now introducing courses in English, because relatively speaking, German is declining as a foreign language which people are learning internationally, relatively speaking. Okay. And so out of a kind of market necessity, they even enhance the use of English in higher education. Okay. So it's also true, of course, that many of those smaller languages in Europe are themselves to some extent threatened. The Sami people, who are the reindeer, where Father Christmas is supposed to live, right? He's supposed to live in the north of Finland. But the native people, reindeer herding, who live out there, their language, for example, is very threatened, not only by the sort of shrinkage of their population, the fact that it has effectively no use outside their immediate community, and the fact, of course, that the dominant communities are Finnish or Swedish speaking. And so they can't really communicate with people outside that community anyway. It's not to say those smaller languages will disappear. Denmark, for example, of course, no one outside Denmark speaks anything that speaks Danish. Anybody who speaks Danish? There used to be a community of Danish missionaries. I just came back yesterday from Madurai, from a conference. And at the Madurai district, one time, I found a colony of Danish missionaries. So they died out literally long ago, right? But I don't think they have much trace of Danish, except on their tombstones, which are not really very fun reading anyway. Okay? But let me just wrap up with a couple of little anecdotes. So I was flying back from actually Chennai. Madurai is very hard to reach. Any of you down there? There are almost no direct flights to Madurai. Okay, so you have to go to Chennai or somewhere, get back to Delhi. The Indian couple sitting next to me were talking to each other in terribly posh English. So this is interesting. And we soon fell into conversation with one another. It turned out they were indeed ethnic Indians, but they were British. Okay. And in between, when they were talking to me or often to each other, they spoke English. When they started arguing with each other, they spoke Punjabi. Which I thought was another interesting aspect of the way in which language is sometimes used. So German, useful speaking to your dog, but French is useful if you want to have civilized conversation. As Danny said, that was in fact true, actually, of my own great-grandparents' generation in Austria. Educated Viennese, for example, would speak French or their language of intercommunication. This was partly because if you know any European history, you know up until 1918, Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was the kind of great power of Central Europe. Okay? After 1918, it's a lovely country, but Austrians are politically stupid. They always join the wrong side. First of all, they joined the wrong sides, they lost their empire. Now it's Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, bits of Italy, Poland, all that stuff, independent countries, right? Then the Second World War, of course, they did exactly the same thing. They never learned from the history of the First World War not to join the Germans, even if you spoke the same language. That leads to it was also very strong. Okay. The point there, I think, is that, again, just to emphasize the little point I started out with, this study of the way in which languages interact with one another is endlessly fascinating. Because it shows you not only the way in which perhaps globalization is occurring, not necessarily the obvious macro level. If I'm whether it was on stockbroking firm anywhere in the world, I probably speak English. English, as you may now know, is the universal language of airline pilots. Now, there are several reasons for this, including that there have been several cases where there were crashes of airlines because there was miscommunication between pilots in the cockpit and the air traffic controllers on the ground. So this has now become essentially universal. Okay? But it's often at that kind of micro level, I think, that you find these most interesting little things going on. Okay, what language do you talk to your dog in? Right? Or is it some kind of baby language you made up yourself? Some woofy kind of thing. The way in which some people have, talked to some children. Is it in your first language, or second language? How do you communicate not just with dogs, but when your emotional state is different? Do you find yourself reverting, in fact, what is really your first language, even though you're perfectly fluent in a second and third language? It's not really, and therefore it would be the one that that language would be the one that would come to the front when you find yourself in a situation where you really have subjective feelings to express. So there's just a few random thoughts, probably, but hopefully helpful, because I find this question of this merging, hybridity, learning from one another, picking up each other's vocabulary, and the way it's often promoted, not only through business and this kind of thing, but I've lived most of my life in Asia, in Japan for 20 years. It was pop culture. In Japan, the major reason people learned English was because most pop music was in English, and most baseball games, of course, broadcast in American English. And I had one student, but she was very good English. So how did you start to learn? So because I wanted to listen to the baseball, which may seem a modest reason for me to learn a language, but why not? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all the speakers, Professor Kanvi, Professor Devins, and Professor Kamo. Before we move on, this is actually a student's interaction session. I don't know if I'm audible. Mr. Rawat, could you please know? Am I connected?
Hello. Yes, ma'am.
We have a students' interaction session. Students are open to questions. You will please ask questions to our speakers. But before that, we have a small video. It's actually about 4 minutes or so, where students have, shared the experiences of learning the foreign languages. Mr. Rawat, if you could just play for us, please. It's just 1 or 4 minutes.
Bonjour à tous. Hello all. My name is Ritvik Gavri. I'm a third-year student here at Jindal Global Business School's IBM program, and I've been studying French here since the past 4 semesters. This currently is my 5th semester learning French, but my journey began with French when I was in class 6th, and I can honestly say that I've been in love with French ever since. Through the course of these 9 years, I've learned a lot about the French language, the nation, the food, the people, and I can honestly say that whenever I interact with French people, I am awestruck by the confidence, energy, and passion which they exude. With almost a decade's experience learning and celebrating the French language, I can honestly say that French feels like home. And I laud the university's efforts in recognizing and celebrating the French language among other European languages as well. And at last, I'd like to say, mon expérience avec la France est merveilleuse. Merci.
Hola, me llamo Cherin. Hi, I'm Cherin. Language learning is a major domain within the field of academia, and European language has sought to develop its own significance within this broad field. Now, the fun fact is that European languages can be learned using the same alphabets that we actually use in English, which is why I personally find it easier to learn. And it also has its own influence in different fields, be it writing sonnets, writing poems and prose, interpretation, translations. These are a couple of fields that I personally find very much interesting. Now, by learning a new language, we think like the native speakers, we learn about the culture and also about the geographical entity from which the language comes from.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Akansha. In today's globalized world, knowledge of a European language is immensely beneficial. Learning European languages open new avenues for educational, economic, cultural, and personal development. The fascination with European languages transcends beyond its history, tradition, culture, arts, literature, tourist attraction, and so on. Due to Europe's thriving economic potential, European languages have become the popular language choice among international students learning a foreign language. Personally, I hope to immigrate to Canada in future when learning European languages will be an asset in expediting the immigration process. Apart from the perks of increased career prospects, I believe that learning European languages enhanced my travel experience in Europe. When I visited European countries such as UK, Switzerland, Italy, France, and Ireland with my family, knowing at least basic conversational European languages helped us not only communicate but also appreciate and participate in the European culture. To sum up, the incentives for learning and mastering European languages are phenomenal and infinite. In the new world around us, European languages can lead the way for beautiful and rich experiences. Merci.
Hello, this is Sai Gupta from Jindal Global Business School. I am an ideal student here. Learning the German language has been quite a rewarding journey for me, since I have always been envious of the craftsmanship and reliability that is associated with German products. I aspire to have my own business, and it is imperative for me to bring these qualities in my products as well. Hence, I am learning this language to explore Germany easily, learn from Germans, and develop myself and my mindset along the way. And at last, I would like to say that Deutsch ist eine wunderbare Sprache. Danke.
Bonjour. I am so glad to be a part of this event that is celebrating the European Day of Languages. It's been my lifelong dream to learn and be able to converse in a European language. Why? Because being an Indian, I can truly appreciate the importance of different languages. Language, whichever it be, is a very powerful tool that aids us in understanding different cultures. And Europe is that place in the world which is so culturally and historically significant. Like each region or country in the continent is so diverse from each other that I believe to be fully able to learn and immerse yourself in that region's culture, it is important to understand the local language. And if the numbers are to be believed, European languages have the largest number of non-native speakers. So as somebody who thinks of herself as a global citizen, learning a European language is just one way for me to achieve that idea of being a global citizen, because these are languages that transcend their geographic borders. So thank you. Bonne journée. Au revoir.
We are open to questions. We have our guest speaker, Professor Nandini, with us, and the other speakers open to questions. Please go ahead. Yes.
Good evening, Professor. I'm Vishal Chaudhary, and I would like to first thank you for giving us such a good speech on the importance of the European Languages Day. My question to you is that, given the fact that so many, especially the global European languages, all have evolved out of the language Latin, so I want to ask you the question that, what is the importance of learning an ancient language like Latin to be able to understand how modern languages, modern global languages in Europe like French and Italian and also English as well have evolved out of that? So what is the importance of this classical language?
Yeah. I suppose it's addressed to me, or?
Yes, Professor, this is Jane.
Yeah. So actually, learning Latin will help you in finding the etymology of words. Because as you know, most of the European languages have emanated from Latin. So if you want to know what originally the word meant and how across the centuries the word has slightly changed in meaning, definitely an ancient language like Latin will help you out. But I don't know how many, I don't think Latin is being taught in Indian universities. No. So it's maybe in the seminaries, yes, you can still find people who could teach you Latin, but definitely, since Latin has been one of the foremost, original language, it definitely will help you in finding out, it's like when you have a virus, you want to know from where it has come, how it has evolved, etc. Since now we are in this COVID era, so that would work better as an example. So in the same way, whenever you have a word, it's always useful to know from where it has originated and what was the initial meaning and how it has changed across the centuries. Like Professor was talking about the word mess, which is no longer used in that sense, where it has been replaced by canteen and other words. So in the same way, like if you know from where the original Latin word comes and from, what does it mean? Definitely it's going to help you.
Thank you, Professor. Any other questions? Yes.
Good evening, Professor. I would like to ask our foreign guest. I don't know your name, sorry. Professor Dennis and Professor Clemmer. So I have been fortunate enough to know both the languages in my early years, French and German, and I was listening to both of your arguments, and they were very good. And the thing that came into my mind is that the influence of a language increases as power of their nation increases. And can this be attributed to the wars that Europe had, maybe World War I and World War II, that the major countries of Europe become weakened, and because of that, their language has also lost relevance. And English was the one that survived, relatively suffered less damage as compared to other European nations. Same goes with Russian, because they were one of the victors. And that is why they had the opportunity to influence their language when the new world order started to take shape. So it would be interesting to hear your comments on this issue. Thank you.
Right, of course. And if you look, if you guys read the newspapers, over this weekend, there's been quite a lot of argument in the UN about Indian membership of the Security Council, right? And this argument, of course, that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have the veto. So China, Russia, or whatever, can ban something which is democratically made by the rest of the council. If you look back, your point, I think, really is reflected in the origin of the UN. Which languages were selected as being significant and are still the official languages, which also include Arabic, by the way. Okay. Although no Arab country has a permanent seat on the Security Council. I think. The couple of little footnotes that one is that I think a significant change has been that economic power does not necessarily reflect linguistic power anymore. If it did, German would still be a very major language, given the size power of the German economy in the EU. But it has, of course, you see it in a lot of German industries. German has actually been displaced by English. So something else is going on there in the process of, I think you're right. So the language of the victor, does tend to become the language which I think spreads, but you'll probably find cases where that's not necessarily true. If I can also just comment on the question about Latin, believe it or not, when I was in elementary school to study Latin, And at the time we hated it. I couldn't care less what Caesar was doing when, he was invading somewhere, right? Okay. Afterwards, you actually realize this was terribly important because it's the basis of so much of classical European culture in religion, in literature, in all sorts of fields. So it actually wasn't a waste of time by any means. So at the time we were a bit too small to kind of appreciate that. And actually, the so-called classics, Latin and Greek, are making a comeback in UK, in British universities. They're thriving again. It seems to be partly because they're interested in the language, partly because of the idea that if you can struggle through those kind of languages and their associated philosophy, culture, and so on, it's really good for your mind. He's not my favorite politician, but Mr. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, in fact, has a first-class degree from Oxford in classics for classical Greeks, one of the toughest courses you can take, because you have to learn both languages to a very high level of fluency. Okay, so it hasn't totally gone away, but your point is a very interesting one. Say to think of that little footnote, the way in which possibly other factors, including economics, have now to some extent displaced the political domination you would expect to come from the language of the pictures.
Just want to add one thing to that about Latin in particular. Unlike my friend John, I was not required to learn Latin. School, I picked it up a little bit later. I learned some Greek because my mother is a modern. But some of my own work as a historian is about 19th century Britain, and I come across so many letters, private letters of people who became famous professors and jurists and politicians and leaders in the 19th and early 20th century Britain who said, the thing about the so-called useless classical public school education in England is that if you could learn Greek and Latin vocabulary and grammar, anything else is easy. It's a kind of mental exercise or practice that you go through that probably the same applies to Sanskrit and many other languages also. But this kind of strangely utilitarian argument is it's not only you understand the vocabulary and ideas of living languages today, but once you learn the logic of grammar and morphology and that sort of thing, pick up a lot of other things more easily, including other languages. Fortunately, I don't know Latin or Greek well enough to say whether that's the case, but I remember reading about this in so many different letters of famous politicians. Well, it must be something to it.
We can take one last question in case there is a yes.
I would like to first wish professors and our guests a very good afternoon alongside my peers. Now, I have a double question basically. My first question is to Professor Dennis and Professor Clemo. You spoke about the assimilation of various Indian terms into English and even other foreign languages. So we often see that while these are often considered to be good ways to talk about when talking about languages, we do not really delegate them a very important position as to how a small dialect from a very small portion of regional Punjab or Haryana can even have an impact on European languages. So while we are celebrating European Day of Languages and the impact European languages had on other nations all over the world, should we not also be separately, or at least in a similar fashion, celebrating the impact which other dialects and such languages had on European languages as well in a broader fashion which opens more discussion and debate? That is my question to Professor Lee and Professor Cameron. My second question is more open-ended, anyone can answer. That is, nowadays we are very familiar with lingo, like memes and various internet language, which we often call slangs, but they have a very globalizing potential. As in a person sitting in France, Croatia, Indonesia, or even Thailand, for matter of fact, can all understand particular few phrases, which maybe is not only stuck to a particular language. So what do you feel is the importance of such lingo, which is often just considered to be funny text, as to the potential of globalizing languages itself? Thank you.
in the second, so open-ended. Yeah, please. Professor Nalini, if you would also like to, please.
Yeah, those are interesting questions. All I have to say is that actually, I thought you were making another point there. Tell me whether this is what you meant. A lot of the language, a lot of the words in Indian languages that have been incorporated into English, both recently are North Indian, or they're actually Persian origin of words. But again, if you look at say Oxford English Dictionary and other records of the state of the language, you see words like tamasha, jugaad, right? All of the management magazines today talk about this is India's particular contribution to management being improvised and so on. So of course the process is continuous and may even accelerate the way things are going as India becomes more important economically, perhaps politically also culturally. I think look forward to a lot more Indian words working their way into English, although it's just an idea of mine that English is actually an Indian language too.
That's not the statement. We have more Indian speakers of English than
To take two questions very briefly, and I thought that's what I was saying in my what I had to say in relation to your first question. In fact, of course, the flow is two ways, fascinating for that reason. And to examine the social mechanisms through which that occurs, so business interest, getting excited about the local culture. In answer to your second question, I'd just say one quick point. Check the internet. Okay. Studies of mobile phone usage in many countries have shown that most of the time people don't talk. They send each other little texts and they send emojis to one another, right? In fact, again, I don't know how it works with you guys in Japan, where I lived for a long time. There's a whole dialect basically made up of little symbols. It's the same kind of thing, right? No, I mean, most people would, as it were, confuse that with the official language. But who knows what long-term effects it has on linguistic usage, or even a shrinkage of vocabulary and sophistication in the use of language, largely because we're using technology as a way of communicating rather than face-to-face communication that's happened more frequently in the past, probably.
Would you like to add something to this, please?
Yeah, I just had two things to add to the question on Latin. Actually, Latin, not only the heritage, but also it is, many of the terms are still being used in the field of medicine, for example, or, other legal terms also. Many are Latin words which are still being used. The second thing which I wanted to say is, the mobility is always to and fro. It could be from the Indian language to the foreign language, or to the foreign language towards the Indian language, or it could be between the two foreign languages also. As Professor said, all the Indian words which have come into the Oxford dictionary. So that is what actually, enlivens a language, because if you don't have that to and fro mobility, a language is bound to die. And that is what we notice also in the Francophone world. For example, at one point of time, they didn't want to use any French word which came from the, Francophone pockets all over the, the world. And then slowly they realized that they have to, and that is how most of the Francophone pockets, the words that the local words that were used were diffused by the novels, by the writings, etc. And nowadays, it is quite common to have those words in French, when at one point of time, only normative French used to be accepted, the Parisian French. Now it's not so. So this, this richness is, is gathered basically by this exchange between the languages. And just one more point I wanted to add, Professor was saying about the street names in Pondicherry. It's not, it's something which is very peculiar to Pondicherry, because, there's a canal which divides Pondicherry, which in historical times during the colonial rule that side used to be the colonial part, I mean, the white town, as they used to call it. And this part used to be the black town. So even now, you will see that the street names in that part, which used to be called as the white town, are the French names. And on this side, it's the Indian, translation or Indian names that have come for the same street. So on one side, you'll have Vaishyal Street, which is a Tamil name. On the other side, it will be, for example, Law de Lauriston, which will be the French name. So that is a peculiarity in Pondicherry. So if at all you come, you will notice it.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm sure the students who are studying French should make it a point to visit Pondicherry. I think it's takes you back to the colonization moment, and I think it's very important part of your learning. And thank you so much, Professor Nalini, for being here. I mean, you've taken up time for a complete 1 hour session, and we are very grateful. And of course, to all the other professors. Before wrapping up, I would like to invite Professor Kathleen Wojcicki, who's our Dean and Professor of School of Liberal Arts, for closing remarks. Professor.
Yeah, thank you. I've been here a couple of times with the class, and it's always a pleasure. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of it, but the parts I heard were absolutely fascinating and made me think of some very important things. For example, Dennis, when you were talking about Ireland, I had several years in a row in the States and New York, groups of students who went to Galway to learn to speak Gaelic language and to speak, how do you say, Eris? And they were told there that they would be staying in homes with people who would be speaking the language, which never turned out to be the case. So then they were told, go to the bars. And what they learned in the bars was songs. So that was the trail of preservation that was really important for them. I just want to point out, because we could spend the whole class talking about the influence of the internet, what's going to be the metaverse, and what languages that's going to, what the consequences of the languages will be. I would like to add that there is a movement, there's been a movement since 1990. There was a UNESCO commission that was set up and still exists, which is the preservation of intangible cultural heritage. And part of that cultural heritage is camembert cheese, champagne, bal music, and musicians, and languages that are not written down frequently. So this is something that's really interesting to see. The world recognizes that preservation of these languages is something that is still very important. And just to round up what we did last point is the French government has spent quite a bit of money over the years, over 3 decades, sending French teachers to Louisiana. Why do you think they're going to Louisiana? Right. Exactly. It was, and the French was for many years the language of the country, but Creole French. So there was always this argument: should the students be studying Creolism? And this was not validated, to the point that now a big university, Tulane University, has a whole department of Creole. And okay, Creole is a combination of French, which is a derivation of French very much. I mean, if you speak French, you can understand Creole. But it also, many of the words, many of the usages come from 200 years ago, which makes it interesting, with the sprinkling of Spanish terms and some Native American terms. But it definitely is French. And you can see it, they even have just published from Tulane a 3-volume dictionary of Creole. So people, my whole point is people feel guarding, preserving each language is important enough to them, even though it may not have the same utilitarian meaning, that it would be to speak fluent English, for example, which people do, their exams are in. But still, as a kid in Louisiana, especially the area we call the Bayou Country, you have classes in Creole, which is something that, is worth paying attention to. Anyway, some who probably know the musicians, food, and everything else that goes on. So I really would like to congratulate all our speakers. I'm sorry, Madam Nandini, I did not hear you, but maybe I think you're recorded. So I will be able to hear you. And John and Dennis, I really appreciate what you're saying. And students, please continue with your work. It is so important that you develop this love for languages. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much to everyone. Professor Melanie, thank you so much once again to all the professors of our JGU, Professor Kathy, Professor Dennis, Professor Nam, Professor Kopa, to all the dear students for so much of enthusiasm, and the IT team. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you so much. And we really want professors who can come over to our university. It will be a pleasure for all of us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
With pleasure. And you're welcome to Pondicherry, all of you.